Hi, I'm Mallory, and I'm the founder and CEO of Lacuna Loft, the online magazine for young adults who are dealing with cancer as patients, caregivers, or survivors. And today we're talking with the authors of the Planet Cancer book, Heidi Adams and Christopher Schultz. So let's just dive right in. Could both of you kind of introduce yourselves a little bit and tell us a little bit about yourselves and your relationship to one another, maybe?
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Heidi Adams. I am currently the president and CEO of Critical Mass. I've been in the young adult cancer community for a really long time, starting with my own diagnosis when I was 26, and that was back in the 90s, in the dark ages. Yeah, and Chris is my brother, so I'm his sister.
Yeah, I'm Chris Schultz, Christopher Schultz, and I did this book with Heidi, who is my older sister. She was diagnosed when I was in college. In '94, was it? Is that right? And yeah, so we did this book together 4 or 5 years ago.
Great. So could you talk a little bit about your diagnosis, or maybe about, I guess we probably have a diagnosis and a caregiving role that could be talked about a little bit.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma in my left tibia when I was 26. I was, sort of bouncing around the world, having a great time, and had bounced back to my parents' guest bedroom in Dallas. When I became symptomatic, I started having pain in my ankle, and that went on for about 8 months. I was misdiagnosed multiple times, just couldn't figure out what was going on, and then I was finally diagnosed and was in treatment for about the next year plus, give or take a couple of months. I had radiation, and it was just a really shocking time. Everything just came to a screeching halt. My whole life had been moving at warp speed, and then all of a sudden I was stopped and in the guest bedroom and going back and forth to the hospital and to the doctor. And it changed everything. It changed everything that was happening at that time. It's changed everything that happened since then.
You're asking me about the caregiver part, huh?
You know what a good patient I was.
Yeah. No, I mean, to this day, it's one of the more vivid memories of my life is when I came home for the Christmas holidays, I believe, when Heidi had started treatment, and being in the hospital with her. It very much presaged the start of Planet Cancer, even then, because I remember having discussions about how there was no one else on the floor that was even close to Heidi's age, and so that was important as early as then. And going to the wig store on one of those days was also completely bizarre, because as I write in this book, it was 100% certain Heidi would never wear whatever wig she picked out, but it's just one of those symbolic steps in the process, and we had fun doing that also. So as far as being a caregiver, I think what I took away from those early days at the beginning of Heidi's treatment was that my role and others' roles who were close to her was to just be the same as I ever was. Heidi was the same person she was, but she had cancer, and she didn't want that to define her as much as no one else did. So that was the sort of what we took to heart from that.
Yeah, I remember being on the couch. When your blood counts get low, you're just cold all the time, and I just remember lying on the couch and just being tired and cold and saying, "I'm freezing, and someone turn up the temperature." And Chris and our other brother Chad would be like, go put a sweater on. Like, go get a blanket. We're watching TV. Like, shut up. And that was kind of what I needed. It was really, it made a difference. Made you feel like same old person.
So what was your entry kind of onto Planet Cancer? In the book, you both talk about the world of having cancer and being around cancer as being on Planet Cancer. So what was your entry onto Planet Cancer like? Kind of the transition from not being on to Planet Cancer and then, crash landing.
I mean, I think the minute I was told my diagnosis was the crash landing, it really was a crash landing, because there's a completely different language, and there's all these rituals and processes and routines and roles and titles and things you've never been exposed to. I mean, as a young person, more than likely, most people are like me. My interaction with the medical system had been, zero. And so to come into that and to be expected, to translate everything, and then, in a fight for my life, it wasn't just a broken arm and I need to understand how bones knit, whatever. It was like I needed to know what was happening because I needed to make really important decisions, and you can't evaluate the information until you know the language and you know the terminology and you know the possible repercussions of what your decisions are. And it was just like going into a foreign world that I had never known existed, before. When you're older, I think you've probably had more interaction with that, with, parents or, peers who are the same age. When you're older, you've had life experience, but I hadn't had that life experience. And, it was not anything I was remotely prepared for, but then had to learn immediately, like drinking from a fire hose.
Yes, I've heard survivors use that phrase more than once, drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah, it's a lot to learn. And then I think that's why it's so hard to process. You can't process the experience while you're going through it because you're trying so hard to learn everything, immediately. And so there's no time to process. And I think that's why, especially for young people, so much doesn't hit until after you're done with treatment, if you finish treatment, and then all of a sudden it's like, what the hell just happened to me? I have heard more than one person they just get through it, and I've had doctors tell me my young adult patients seem fine and they're not worrying about anything, and I'm just like, give it time. And once they have space to actually step back and think about what happened or try and get back to the real world after being on Planet Cancer, then you sort of see the difference.
So along those lines, from both of your perspectives, really, are there days when you still feel the weight of that cancer experience, and then are there also days where you're able to completely forget about it, or is it just kind of a constant that has reshaped the way everything has progressed?
I mean, I think, from my point of view, it's I am fortunately 20 years out, so it's, as an immediate experience, it's pretty far in my rearview mirror. I think just because my career has been in the cancer world for so long now, the constancy of it and immediacy of it is really, at this point, more about other people's experiences and people who I've met and people who are my friends and my colleagues and who I work with every day. And so it's more, I don't worry about myself so much anymore. I think it still is in my life in sort of insidious ways. I remember, Chris, I don't even know if you remember this, but, one other sort of point to note is that everybody else in our immediate family, except for Chris, has also been diagnosed with cancer. And so our parents, our brother, and so there are things like Chris was going for a physical one day, and I remember you called me and you're like, hey, is there anything I should ask them? And I'm like, no, you're going for a physical. And then he went, and of course I'm sitting by the phone like, oh no, he's going for a physical. And then I talked to him a day or so later. I'm like, oh, how was your physical? And he said, my cancer is still in the formative stage, so it's fine. And I was just like, oh. And that's just how it's become such a part of our vernacular and our interactions in our family in particular. I think that's how it still is there.
Yeah, I think that the fact that cancer has hit our family so hard, starting with grandparents and coming into our nuclear family, I think the way it sort of affects me personally is on a few different levels. On a more social level, I guess I even though I haven't had cancer personally, I feel like I have the tools to discuss it with other people who are affected by it. Maybe more tools than the average person. As far as how it affects me directly, I think that it whether you're conscious of it or not, it shapes the decisions you make, and the idea that when people are diagnosed, then they confront mortality, especially young adults, at a time decades before people typically think about it. And I think that when you're that close to that, it'll shape your decisions, and you sort of are much more aware of things that you maybe the best way to say it, things that you don't want to do in life, more than things that you do, and you won't clutter your quotidian existence with things that matter less. And so I think that's probably one of the positives to come out of it. And the other, of course, is the completely ridiculous way that our family talks about it with one another, with sort of no holds barred.
So what was the process like of writing the book, and how and why did you decide to put all this information for all the young adults dealing with cancer at the moment and in the future kind of in one place?
You want to start that one, Chris?
I could try. Interrupt me whenever. The book sort of percolated over a long time, hearing Heidi talk about how, without going through a really long and boring explanation, I think we just had conversations that there was nothing like this, a sort of first-person useful account of all the things that people need to be aware of from diagnosis through the end of treatment, and especially in a language that young adults would relate to and appreciate. So I think that that was the when we became more and more aware that there was nothing like that, we just sort of decided, all right, well, let's just give this a shot and try to not make it a memoir, and not make it which there are a lot of great examples of that already out there. Make it something that tilts toward the pragmatic, and
like the guidebook.
Right, like a guidebook.
When we decided to write the book, I guess the Planet Cancer's online community, which was the first online community for young adults with cancer, had been up for several years, and I think we were just so aware of the valuable information that was being shared online in the message boards and when we switched to the private network. I think there was so much good information that was there that the people were sharing with each other, and we wanted to get it out to a broader audience, or people who might not be online, or something that you could carry to the hospital with you or wherever, or that you could give to a friend to sort of understand what you were going through. And Chris had written one or two, had been published several times by that point, and so and I had done a previous book with another friend of mine, another cancer survivor who's a photographer, And so we just kind of started talking. We're like, this could be a book. This could be something useful. And then, yeah, so we just tackled it. The process was Chris wrote just about everything, and I edited and inserted, and it was a lot of late nights and a lot of late nights, a lot of weekends, a lot of. It took a year longer than we thought it would, and yeah, painful.
There was you reach a very discernible point where if I was writing something, it would start to feel fraudulent. You know, Heidi, you have to write this because someone who's had cancer has to. So there's you know, by definition, there's a very distinct division of labor in this process, right? The stuff that Heidi has to say about the real nuts and bolts of the process, I come from her.
And then I think, you know, the thing that brings the book to life is really all the other people, you know, all the voices. And they were people who I knew in the community, and, you know, Chris was kind of also the cat herder, you know, helping, you know, reach out and shaping their stories and requesting submissions. And, you know, I think that's probably was the most time-intensive piece of the whole thing, was getting all the contributions from all the different people in a way that was, you know, we didn't want less than excellent writing. You know, it had to be interesting. It had to be practically, you know, practical and informative, and or give some unique perspective. We just didn't want the same old stuff. And so that was probably the most important, but the most interesting part of the book, to us at least, or to me. I don't know.
Was there an emotional component to putting the book together? I think in the intro or the foreword you talk about kind of your first community of young adult survivors who you outlived. I mean, reading that, even as a survivor myself, that's kind of where the weight of this really falls, at least in my heart and head. So what was that like?
I mean, that was hard. You know, the beginning of Planet Cancer was precipitated by the loss of, you know, the first two young adults that I ever met. And so, you know, thinking about them, but then also there were too many people that we lost even in the course of writing the book, you know, contributors who sent us wonderful essays and stories and, you know, didn't live to see it published. And, you know, that was just gut-wrenching, you know, but in a way it's, you know, we could think of it as a testament to them and their honesty and their willingness to reach out and help other young adults, which was always the point of Planet Cancer, you know, to help other people going in the same boat.
Well, I guess cancer and caregiving aside, how is life post-Planet Cancer for both of you?
It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. Yeah. It's you know, the proximity by you know, Heidi's, which is a topic addressed, you know, to a great extent in the book. You know, the diagnosis of a young adult brings many back in, often under the same roof of their family, and so there was an unanticipated physical closeness that we had for a while that nobody thought would happen. And you know, since then we live different places, and sometimes that's disappointing, but yeah, everything's good.
I think, well, I'll expand on that a little bit, was that, you know, I was in treatment all of 1994. I started at the end of 93, like December, and I went through the beginning of 95. And so, and Chris was at college, and, you you know, when you're in college, you have the opportunity to do all kinds of great things. And, you know, summer rolled around and all his friends were going to travel abroad or internship here or there. And, you know, Chris came home and he worked at the Gap or somewhere like that. I don't know.
They never quickly ruled me out from ever folding the clothes. I was the worst.
He was the worst.
And 12-year-olds working circles around me. Yeah.
But he came home and to spend time with me, and it was so, you know, that was amazing. And I think, you know, the saddest day of that year was, I think, the day he went back to school, and I was sitting on the back porch of the apartment, just like, he's moving on with his life, and I've got to go to the doctor again. But
yeah.
you know, I so appreciated it, you know, and the surprise visit home at Thanksgiving or Christmas, you know, it meant so much. And I think, you know, whatever else that experience did, I think it really brought our whole family closer. And then, you know, 10 years later, when everybody else was diagnosed, it was, you know, we were prepared as anyone could be, you know, to cope with that, because we had built, you know, these really strong relationships. I think, you know, my life since then has been all about young adult cancer, and first on Planet Cancer, and then even at Livestrong, and now at Critical Mass. It's put me on this path of cancer advocacy and patient advocacy, and, you know, I'm so intrigued by how that happened, because it seems like an accident when I look back. When you say, of course, you naturally ended up here, but there was no conscious thought. It was just sort of like, this is really important to me, and that leads to this, and this leads to that, and, you know, it's fascinating how that all worked out, and it's still working out.
Well, thank you so much, Chris and Heidi, for chatting with me today. If you haven't already read the book, Planet Cancer, it really is a must-read. Even for survivors who are several years out, it's got some great stuff in there, some really poignant first-hand accounts from other young adult cancer survivors. And from everyone watching at home, thank you for joining in. To find even more great content, check out lacunaloft.com.